Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room. Dr. Strangelove wasn't just a black comedy about nuclear war. It was Stanley Kubrick's most terrifying achievement, a film that turned global annihilation into pitch-perfect satire while nearly destroying its own production in the process. Behind Kubrick's masterpiece lay a whirlwind of studio battles, actor injuries, secret military bases, and one of cinema's most legendary deleted scenes. We're about to reveal 15 weird facts about Dr. Strangelove that expose how this Cold War nightmare became Hollywood gold, plus one bonus revelation that will completely change how you see this classic forever. Ready to discover what really happened behind the war room doors? Let's dive in. Columbia Pictures held the film hostage over Peter Sellers when Columbia Pictures agreed to finance Dr. Strangelove, they delivered an ultimatum that would reshape cinema history. The studio executives demanded that Peter Sellers play not one, not two, but 4 major roles in the film. This wasn't artistic vision, it was pure financial calculation. Columbia had witnessed Sellers' transformative performance in Kubrick's previous film Lolita and believed his star power alone could guarantee box office success. Kubrick initially resisted this commercial interference. The director prided himself on creative control and despised studio meddling, but Columbia held all the cards. Without their backing, his vision of nuclear satire would never reach audiences. In a moment of bitter acceptance, Kubrick later described the studio's demand as one of those crass and grotesque stipulations that define the movie business. What he didn't realize was that this forced compromise would become the film's greatest strength. Sellers' multiple roles weren't just a gimmick. They became a brilliant metaphor for the interchangeable nature of power in a world teetering on the edge of destruction. The studio's greed accidentally created art. Peter Sellers nearly played 4 characters instead of 3. Peter Sellers was originally cast to play Air Force Major T.J. King Kong, the B-52 pilot who would deliver the film's most iconic moment, riding a nuclear bomb like a rodeo cowboy. Sellers had already mastered 3 vastly different characters: the bumbling RAF officer, Lionel Mandrake, the weak-willed President Merkin Muffley, and the sinister wheelchair-bound Dr. Strangelove himself. But during production, disaster struck on set. While shooting the film, Sellers suffered a fall on set that re-aggravated a previous injury. The accident left him unable to navigate the cramped bomber cockpit set that Kubrick had constructed with obsessive attention to detail. The tight quarters required physical agility that Sellers' injured body simply couldn't provide. Kubrick faced a nightmare scenario: reshoot expensive scenes or find a replacement for one of cinema's most memorable characters. The director chose replacement, and it transformed the film forever. He cast Slim Pickens, a real-life cowboy and rodeo performer, in the role. Pickens brought authentic Texas swagger to Kong that no amount of Sellers' method acting could have matched. Sometimes the best performances come from life's unexpected interventions, not calculated artistic decisions. The film was shot entirely in England due to a divorce. Dr. Strangelove was supposed to be filmed in New York, capturing the authenticity of American military and political power. Instead, the entire production moved across the Atlantic to Shepperton Studios near London. The reason wasn't artistic or financial, it was personal drama that held international filmmaking hostage. Sellers was in the middle of a divorce at the time and unable to leave England. British courts had restricted his travel during legal proceedings, turning his personal crisis into a production nightmare. Kubrick faced an impossible choice: abandon his star or relocate an entire American military satire to foreign soil. He chose loyalty over logistics, moving sets, crew, and his vision across an ocean. This forced relocation created unexpected benefits. Shot in Shepperton Studios outside of London from February through November 1963, Dr. Strangelove was conceived and realized in the shadow of a real-life nightmare scenario. The Cuban Missile Crisis had unfolded just months earlier. The distance from American soil gave Kubrick a critical perspective on his homeland's nuclear paranoia. Sometimes geographic exile produces the clearest vision of home. The war room set became an architectural icon. Ken Adams' war room design didn't just serve the film, it influenced real political architecture. The production designer, born in Germany and trained as an architect, created a space that merged Nazi intimidation with American corporate efficiency. The result was a circular chamber dominated by a massive round table lit by an enormous overhead ring light that cast ominous shadows on the faces of those who would decide humanity's fate. The relatively simple and inexpensive sets for Dr. Strangelove 1964 were created and photographed for maximum impact. Adams' design philosophy emphasized psychological intimidation over expensive decoration. The war room's stark geometry suggested that nuclear decisions happened in spaces stripped of humanity, where abstract strategy mattered more than human consequence. What audiences didn't know was that Adams' fictional war room would later influence actual government architecture. Pentagon planners and White House designers studied Kubrick's vision, incorporating elements of its clinical efficiency into real command centers. Art didn't just imitate life, it reshaped the spaces where life and death decisions are made. The fictional became a blueprint for terrifying reality. The famous bomb-riding scene almost didn't happen. The scene of an Air Force major, played by Slim Pickens, riding atop a falling nuclear bomb, is one of the most enduring images in cinematic history. But this moment of dark comedy brilliance nearly vanished due to technical limitations and Kubrick's notorious perfectionism. The sequence required complex practical effects, precise timing, and an actor willing to straddle a prop nuclear weapon while conveying both patriotic determination and absurdist comedy. Kubrick initially conceived the scene as a simple cutaway shot, but Pickens' natural charisma transformed it into something larger. The actor brought genuine cowboy authenticity to the role, whooping and waving his hat as if he were riding a bronco at a county fair instead of delivering global annihilation. His performance turned nuclear apocalypse into a twisted celebration of American frontier spirit. The scene's lasting power comes from its perfect fusion of horror and comedy. Audiences simultaneously laugh at Pickens' enthusiasm and recoil from its implications. The image endures because it captures humanity's capacity for both destruction and absurd joy, sometimes in the same moment. This wasn't just dark comedy, it was a prophetic vision of how civilizations end, not with dignified tragedy, but with spectacular, grinning catastrophe. A secret military base nearly derailed production. While capturing aerial footage over Greenland, Kubrick's second unit stumbled into an international incident that could have destroyed the film before its release. While shooting aerial footage over Greenland, the second unit camera crew accidentally filmed a secret U.S. military base. Their plane was forced down, and the crew was suspected of being Soviet spies. The crew found themselves detained, questioned, and treated as potential enemies of the state. Military officials couldn't believe that a film crew would accidentally photograph classified installations. Surely this was elaborate espionage disguised as Hollywood production. The irony was devastating. A movie about nuclear paranoia had triggered the very suspicions it sought to satirize. Kubrick's team spent hours explaining their innocent intentions to military investigators who remained convinced they were witnessing sophisticated Soviet intelligence gathering. The incident revealed how thin the line between comedy and reality had become during the Cold War. What audiences would later laugh at in theaters, military paranoia, and fear of infiltration nearly imprisoned the people creating that very satire. Sometimes life provides better material than any screenwriter could imagine. The film's original ending was a massive food fight. The film originally ended with an elaborate pie fight inside the war room. However, the scene was cut, robbing audiences of what would have been cinema's most expensive food fight sequence. Kubrick had planned to conclude his nuclear satire with the ultimate breakdown of political decorum, world leaders pelting each other with desserts while nuclear bombs fell outside. The pie fight represented Kubrick's vision of political discourse reduced to its most primitive level. As mushroom clouds bloomed across the world, the men responsible for civilization's collapse would engage in childish food combat, their dignity dissolved in custard and cream. The sequence required extensive choreography, multiple cameras, and careful protection of the expensive war room set. But Kubrick ultimately decided the scene pushed comedy too far into absurdist territory. He wanted audiences to leave the theater with nuclear dread, not memories of politicians covered in whipped cream. The deleted ending exists in film vaults, a reminder of how different choices in editing can completely alter a masterpiece's emotional impact. Sometimes the most expensive scenes are worth nothing compared to perfect final silence. George C. Scott hated his performance and tried to stop it. George C. Scott delivered one of cinema's most memorable performances as General Buck Turgidson, but he despised every frame of it. Scott had agreed to play the role straight, believing he was appearing in a serious drama about military crisis. He had no idea Kubrick was directing a savage comedy that would make his character appear buffoonish and grotesque. Kubrick employed psychological manipulation to extract Scott's over-the-top performance. The director convinced the actor to do practice takes with exaggerated expressions and gestures, promising these were just warm-ups before the real filming began. Scott trusted Kubrick's reputation and gave increasingly broad performances, believing they would be discarded. Instead, Kubrick used only the most extreme takes in the final film. When Scott saw the finished movie, he felt betrayed and publicly criticized Kubrick's deceptive directing methods. The actor believed his reputation for serious dramatic work had been undermined by comedy he never intended to perform. But audiences embraced Scott's manic energy as perfect satire of military megalomania. The performance that nearly destroyed his relationship with Kubrick became one of his most celebrated achievements. Art sometimes emerges from manipulation disguised as collaboration. Sterling Hayden's character was based on real military leaders. Sterling Hayden's General Jack D. Ripper wasn't just fictional paranoia, he was composite portrait drawn from actual military figures who terrified government officials during the Cold War era. Kubrick and screenwriter Terry Southern studied real generals who publicly advocated for preemptive nuclear strikes against the Soviet Union, finding inspiration in their genuine extremist rhetoric. General Ripper's obsession with precious bodily fluids and fluoridation conspiracies reflected actual paranoid theories circulating in military circles. Some officers genuinely believed communist infiltration extended to public water supplies, seeing fluoride treatment as elaborate poisoning scheme. Kubrick didn't need to invent insanity, he simply had to document it with satirical precision. What audiences didn't know was how closely Ripper's dialogue matched real military communications. Pentagon officials privately expressed concern about generals whose anti-communist fervor bordered on clinical paranoia. The characters' rants about purity of essence weren't exaggerated comedy. They were barely disguised quotations from classified briefings. Hayden's performance captured the terrifying reality that some of America's nuclear weapons were controlled by men whose grip on sanity remained questionable. Fiction became documentary of institutional madness. The Cuban Missile Crisis nearly canceled the film. Before we continue with more shocking revelations, go ahead and like and subscribe because what happened next will completely change how you see this Cold War masterpiece. The Cuban Missile Crisis erupted just as Kubrick was developing his nuclear satire, creating a terrifying parallel between fiction and reality that nearly destroyed the project before filming began. Dr. Strangelove was conceived and realized in the shadow of a real-life nightmare scenario that no one laughed at. The Cuban Missile Crisis, which unfolded over 13 terrifying days in October 1962. For 13 days, the world teetered on the edge of nuclear war, while Kubrick refined his script about accidental nuclear war. The timing was either perfect or catastrophic, depending on perspective. Studio executives panicked, believing audiences wouldn't embrace nuclear comedy so soon after genuine nuclear terror. They pressured Kubrick to abandon the project or transform it into straightforward thriller. The director refused, arguing that recent events proved his satirical vision was prophetic rather than premature. He believed comedy was the only honest response to nuclear absurdity. The crisis actually strengthened Kubrick's resolve and sharpened his satirical focus. He witnessed political leaders making decisions that seemed lifted directly from his screenplay, rational men behaving irrationally when faced with ultimate power. Reality provided better material than any screenwriter could invent, confirming that nuclear policy was already absurd enough to merit savage comedy. Peter Sellers' improvised doctor. Strangelove's accent on the spot. Dr. Strangelove's distinctive German accent and mannerisms weren't scripted. They emerged from Peter Sellers' genius for spontaneous character creation during actual filming. Sellers arrived on set without a fixed vocal approach, planning to develop the character organically through interaction with other actors and Kubrick's direction. The wheelchair-bound scientist's speech patterns evolved from Sellers' observations of real German scientists who had worked on both Nazi weapons programs and American space projects. He drew inspiration from Wernher von Braun and other former Nazi researchers who seamlessly transitioned from creating V-2 rockets for Hitler to developing Saturn rockets for NASA. The accent captured moral flexibility disguised as scientific objectivity. Sellers' improvised performance included the character's rebellious Nazi salutes, moments when "Doctor." Strangelove's right arm unconsciously snaps into fascist gesture while he struggles to maintain democratic facade. These weren't scripted movements. They emerged from Sellers' understanding that the character's Nazi past constantly threatens to surface despite his new American identity. The actor created a man whose body betrayed ideological conversion that existed only on paper. Each uncontrolled salute revealed how thin the veneer of reformed extremism really was. The Doomsday Machine was based on actual Soviet plans. Dr. Strangelove's ultimate horror, the Soviet Doomsday Machine that would automatically trigger global nuclear destruction, wasn't science fiction fantasy. It was based on genuine military strategies that both superpowers were secretly developing during the Cold War's most dangerous period. Kubrick and his research team discovered classified information about automated nuclear response systems designed to function without human intervention. The film's Doomsday Machine reflected real Soviet concerns about decapitation strikes that would eliminate political leadership before retaliation could be ordered. Military planners on both sides worried that successful surprise attacks might prevent nuclear response, encouraging enemies to attempt first strikes. Automated systems promised mutual destruction even if command structures were destroyed. What terrified Pentagon analysts was learning that Soviet engineers were actually building such systems. The fictional device that provides Doctor. Strangelove's climax was uncomfortably close to reality, machines programmed to end civilization without requiring human authorization. Kubrick's satirical vision captured the insane logic of nuclear strategy, weapons too dangerous for humans to control, too important to leave uncontrolled. The joke became prophecy when audiences learned that both nations were seriously considering automated apocalypse as rational policy. Comedy revealed the truth that serious military analysis couldn't acknowledge. Slim Pickens never knew he was in a comedy. Slim Pickens delivered the film's most memorable performance without understanding he was creating comedy gold. Kubrick deliberately kept the rodeo performer ignorant about the film's satirical intent, directing him to play Major Kong with complete sincerity and patriotic conviction. Pickens believed he was starring in a serious military thriller about American heroism under extreme pressure. The director's deception was calculated artistic strategy. Kubrick understood that genuine conviction would make Kong's patriotic enthusiasm more absurdly powerful than any intentional comedy performance. He wanted authentic American optimism, not satirical exaggeration of it. Pickens provided exactly that, real cowboy spirit applied to nuclear warfare. When Pickens whooped and rode that falling bomb towards Soviet targets, he was channeling genuine frontier enthusiasm for challenging assignments. He saw Kong as heroic pilot completing vital mission despite impossible odds. The actor's sincere performance created devastating satirical contrast, authentic American spirit applied to civilization's destruction. Only after seeing the finished film did Pickens realize he'd been participating in dark comedy rather than military drama. His reaction mixed appreciation for Kubrick's vision with discomfort about being manipulated into creating satire he never intended. The performance worked precisely because it avoided satirical self-awareness. The phone conversations were technical masterpieces. The film's telephone sequences between President Muffley and Soviet Premier Kissoff required groundbreaking technical innovation that influenced decades of cinema communication scenes. Kubrick faced the challenge of making one-sided phone conversations dramatically compelling while maintaining satirical momentum throughout extended dialogue sequences. Sound engineers developed sophisticated audio mixing techniques to suggest the Soviet premier's responses through carefully timed pauses, ambient noise, and subtle audio cues that audiences could interpret without actually hearing the other participant. The technology allowed Sellers to perform complex diplomatic negotiations as solo theatrical performances. These scenes showcased Sellers' theatrical background and his ability to create dramatic tension through vocal performance alone. He portrayed a weak American president, attempting diplomatic damage control while nuclear crisis spiraled beyond anyone's ability to manage. The phone conversations became studies in political impotence disguised as leadership. Kubrick's technical innovation in these sequences influenced countless later films dealing with phone conversations, satellite communications, and remote negotiations. Directors studied how Dr. Strangelove made unseen characters feel present through precise sound design and performance timing. The telephone became a dramatic device rather than mere plot convenience. The film predicted real nuclear close calls. Dr. Strangelove's premise, accidental nuclear war triggered by military malfunction and human error, seemed like dark fantasy in 1964. Unfortunately, subsequent decades proved Kubrick's satirical scenario was prophetic documentation of genuine nuclear dangers that would repeatedly threaten civilization. Multiple real incidents have mirrored the film's basic plot structure: technical failures, communication breakdowns, and human paranoia bringing the world within minutes of nuclear exchange. Computer glitches have registered massive Soviet attacks that never occurred. Radar operators have mistaken weather phenomena for incoming missiles. Communication systems have failed during international crises when clear information was most crucial. The film's most terrifying prediction was that nuclear war might result not from rational political calculation, but from technical accident combined with human stubbornness. Military history has confirmed this fear repeatedly. Close calls involving equipment failure, misinterpreted data, and officers who nearly launched nuclear weapons based on false information. Kubrick's comedy became documentary of institutional dysfunction that would continue threatening human survival for decades after his fictional war room deliberations. The satirical premise proved uncomfortably realistic as actual nuclear close calls accumulated throughout the Cold War and beyond. Sometimes prophetic vision disguises itself as entertainment. Here's the revelation that changes everything about Dr. Strangelove. The Pentagon conducted classified analysis of Kubrick's film to identify potential security vulnerabilities revealed through the director's research process. Military officials were disturbed by how accurately the movie depicted actual nuclear command procedures, classified base layouts, and genuine military protocols. Defense Department analysts couldn't understand how a civilian filmmaker had obtained such detailed knowledge of nuclear warfare procedures without access to classified information. They suspected either security breaches or insider assistance from personnel with high-level clearances. Investigation revealed that Kubrick's obsessive research methods and logical deduction had reconstructed classified processes from publicly available sources. The military's concern proved Kubrick's satirical vision was more accurate than comfortable. Officials worried that foreign intelligence services might use the film as educational material for understanding American nuclear capabilities and vulnerabilities. The comedy had accidentally created a potential espionage tool. Most remarkably, Pentagon analysis concluded that Dr. Strangelove exposed genuine weaknesses in nuclear command structure that required immediate attention. Fictional satire had performed more effective security analysis than official military reviews. The film didn't just predict nuclear close calls, it identified systemic problems that made them inevitable. Dr. Strangelove emerged from chaos, paranoia, and brilliant artistic vision to become cinema's most prescient nightmare. What began as satirical comedy about nuclear absurdity became a documentary of institutional madness that continues threatening human survival. Kubrick's masterpiece proved that sometimes the most effective way to reveal terrifying truth is through devastating laughter. Ready to discover more shocking behind-the-scenes secrets from cinema history? Like and subscribe for more revelations that will change how you see classic films forever. Because in Hollywood, as in the war room, you can't always fight in here, but you can always learn what really happened behind the camera. How do you love the bomb now?